Hello and welcome back to SpriteGuard Plays Homebrew. Today we'll be building a simple rocket going from the very beginning all the way to the finished product. So the first thing that I'm going to do is lock the navigator in place and go to the pipe builder. I'll place a block and double click it to go into pipe laying mode, and then lay pipe all the way across the board, double click again to finish it, and we'll call that line 25. So we just need some long lines in order to build the first part of the rocket, which is going to be a stand, because it's going to be very tall and it will have a very high center of gravity, and so we need a way of getting it to stand up. And the way that I found to do this, now I'm attaching it to the side of the start block so that the ghost block that appears when you build a frame in the frame builder will not get in my way. So we just put a line 9 dropping down from there, and we will connect that to a cross of these line 25s, and then we'll put a cubicle there at the center so that it's even, and this will give us a nice wide base so that the rocket will not tip over. And you will see when we're finished that we need a very wide base, because this is going to be fairly lopsided and not have a very well-placed center of gravity. But that won't matter because we're basically designing this to account for that. Now the next thing that we're going to build is a rocket stage, and we're going to build a very narrow one just using some line 9s and some line 5s. And the reason that we're going to make it fairly narrow is just because we want to make a very simple rocket that doesn't have a lot that can go wrong with it. We're going to put the cube on the bottom of the starting block so that the ghost is on the inside of the rocket stage, and then we're just going to build a little cross out of these line 5s, and we're going to connect those together with some curve 5s to make a nice circular piece. And that will be sort of our basis for building this narrow little rocket. You can build wider stages to accommodate bigger fuel tanks and possibly even more engines, but for now I want to build something really simple and straightforward because I want to get off the ground without having to worry about too much complexity. So I just need to place these in place, and we'll have a nice circular base to build from. And then once that's in place, we can start building upwards. You can be a little bit more sloppy than I was there. You can rotate pieces around easily enough. But now we're just going to go in and put these line 9s up here, and we're going to go from back to front so that it's a little bit easier to place them. I like to click on the part of the frame that's attached to the builder already, because that way you don't get the little ghost that appears. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to see where you're placing things if you have the little piece ghost to show you where it's going to go. Sometimes it's easier to just place them without the ghost because you want to attach it to a particular space more than you want to attach it in a particular orientation. So that really depends on what you're doing. So now we're going to attach these by their sides and rotate them into place. And you want to be careful that they will rotate into place correctly. You can press Shift in order to rotate these clockwise instead of counterclockwise if you need to do that, but you still have to make sure that they will be concave instead of convex instead of concave. You want them to bow outwards instead of inwards. And then we're going to drop just a few of these line 5s and make sure that we put them so that they point into the center. And I don't know exactly how to guarantee that they will always point into the center, but if they don't, you can just turn them around easily enough by clicking on the little circle around where they connect. And then we're going to drop in some more line 9s and basically just replicate what we just did. Recreate the same pattern. And this will be tall enough to support a liquid propulsion engine and a couple of small fuel tanks. And that will be enough to give us a very basic rocket. And then in a later episode, I will show you how to build some bigger and more complicated rockets. And I will go a little bit more into some of the difficulties that come as you build bigger and bigger rockets. But for now, we're just going to focus on putting together something nice and simple and easy to use. So we're just going to repeat everything we just did. Put these on top here. Make sure that they are bowed out in the correct direction. Use Shift to turn them clockwise instead of counterclockwise here so that they go into place a little bit more quickly. This one needs to go counterclockwise, so I won't hold Shift. And then this will be the last one, and that can go in either direction because it has to go 2 twists. So now we have that in place. We just need some line 5s, and that will give us the body of our rocket. And from here we'll be able to start attaching some parts and building out a full rocket. Now the last thing that I'm going to do here before I go into building the rest of the rocket is I'm going to drop one more cube in here that will give us one more anchor point to attach things. It sometimes makes things a little bit easier, and we'll just call this stage, and that will be the core of our rocket. So now we can go into the vehicle builder and start building. We can drop in the stand, and now the reason that we put the ghost block on the front of that line 9 is so that we can attach the top of the line 9 to the bottom of this ghost block and get that as close to the ground as possible. We will be going up into the ceiling in some of our more advanced rockets, and so we want to start out building very low to the ground. And as we get into more advanced rockets, that will matter more. So now we need a detacher here so that we don't take the stand with us into space, and then we just attach the first stage of our rocket there. And now we'll be able to detach our rocket from the stand. And then we're going to put another detacher here. This will let us have a multi-stage rocket. And it will let us ditch a stage once its fuel tanks are empty. And because we're building a very simple rocket, the fuel tanks will run out very fast, and we'll want to be able to detach them once they are empty. So that's 2 stages stacked up on top of each other, and that will be the basis for our rocket. Now we're just going to look everything over and make sure we're not forgetting anything. And we're going to go back into our parts menu, and I always have a little bit of trouble finding the parts. I don't always know where they're going to be, and these rocket engines have a tendency to roll around if you drop them in the wrong place, which can be kind of frustrating. And if you grab them like this, it will actually unselect whatever you've selected, so that's frustrating. But ultimately doesn't matter that much. We just want to place this. I generally like to put the rockets on without the shadow because the shadow is so big, and I know exactly where I want to place them, so it's not that helpful. So that's the way that I try to do it there. And these are going on in the correct orientation. We want the brightly colored bit at the bottom that shows us where the fire will be coming out. And then we just put those on, and that will be the first stage of our rocket. And 4 of those will put out a lot of power drop that in a way that is going to make it roll around quite a bit. I may just want to wait for it to slow down so that I can attach it like that. And sometimes they go on sideways like this, and I just have to figure out which direction I'm turning it. If I had held shift there, it would have turned in the correct direction, and I would have saved some twists. But it doesn't matter that much, because really what we're doing is not that complicated, and a few extra clicks is not going to hurt us. We're not doing a speed run. We're not really trying to do anything other than put this together. And all of these are going on upside down, probably because I put the second stage on upside down. And the reason I did that was because of the way that I'm going to attach parts inside of it. So it creates a little bit more work for us at this point, but later on it will be a little bit better for us because of where that ghost block is going to be. It won't get in our way as much. So the next thing that we want to do, and it always takes me a little bit too long to find the parts, is we're going to drop in 4 fuel tanks. I think we actually only want 3 fuel tanks, but I will look at this and consider. So now that ghost block is in a place that thematically is a little bit frustrating because this fuel tank is going to be sort of floating, and I would prefer it wasn't, but it doesn't actually matter. It will stay attached just fine. And then we're going to put this 1 fuel tank a little higher up. We can't put it down there because it will clip through. Again, that's mostly a thematic thing. We could put a 3rd fuel tank in there or a 2nd fuel tank in here, and they would just clip right through each other, but I want to keep this a little bit thematically pure and have it looking nice and having as little clipping as possible, because having a rocket that looks good is as much of a goal here as having one that flies straight. And so looking right and being very thematically neat is something that we're not actually sacrificing very much for. So now we're putting in a gyroscope, and we want to put it in with this curve here so that it's centered in the rocket, and that will keep our center of gravity as close to the middle as possible. And that way our rocket will wobble a bit less. And so we just connect that in there, and then I want it to be flat so that it can keep our rocket from wobbling around as much. The rockets don't put completely even force on our ship, and then we need a battery to power the gyroscope. And so we will attach that, and it will clip through a little bit, which is not ideal, but is fine. It won't hurt us. If I rotated it, it might actually not clip, but it doesn't matter enough to really be concerned that much with it. So there are a lot of ways that you could vary this depending on how much you care about the height that you're going to get to, the ease of flying the ship, and how good the ship looks. So you don't have to do the things exactly the way that I do them. That's one of the great things about this game, is that there's a lot of ways that you can put your own personal twist, even on a vehicle that you're building exactly the same. So now I'm going to be using the MIG tail wing, because I found that those have a nice sweep to them that looks very good, and they are useful for keeping the rocket a little bit straighter. I don't know how much they actually do. I haven't done a lot of experiments. One of the earlier designs that I did for this actually had them tilted a little bit to spin the whole rocket, and I don't remember if that made it into my first Homebrew video, but that ended up being pretty disorienting, but it did keep the rocket straight. That was before I figured out how to use the gyroscope, and the gyroscope adds a little bit extra stability. It doesn't add as much stability as I would like, but it adds enough that it makes it work. It makes the whole package, everything together, work well enough to get us pretty high up in the air. And then we will just plop a seat onto the top. Not going to put much of a fancy cockpit. I find the forwardmost weld point on the seat going on to the centermost point on the rocket is what's going to center our seat the best. You might want it a little bit further forward or back. You might try that. It might be worth doing. And don't forget to bake, because you won't be able to edit the connections until you bake. So now we have everything in place, and we just need to hook it up. So link everything to the seat to control it, and if you double-click a part, it will select all of the parts of that class. And then we're going to hook up the top 4 to our Boost 2 key, which I have mapped to spacebar. And the bottom ones will be the Boost 1 key. And that way we can control our staging. And then we'll hook up our fuel tanks. Hold Shift so that we don't go out of link mode until we've linked up everything that we want to be drawing from that fuel tank. And then we can Shift-click these 2 fuel tanks to link both of them up to these 4 rockets. And so that way the bottom stage will draw from the bottom fuel tanks, top stage will draw from the top fuel tanks. And then we want to show fuel to our pilot so that we can see when we need to drop the rockets, because if you leave them on, it will actually, when they run out of fuel, they will lend some turbulence to the rocket. So you want to drop them off right as they run out of fuel. You don't want to... And then you want to make sure that your detachers are attached to the boost button for the rockets just above them. So that's boost 1 for the bottom one, boost 2 for the top one. And that way when you hit boost, it will fire your rockets and detach everything below them. So that's very useful. Now I just want to go over everything and make sure that I haven't forgotten anything, and edit our screen so that we can see all of our fuel tanks separately, as separate lines on our screen. Bake that so that the changes stay, and make sure that we can look around from our seat. And then show our altitude and our speed to the pilot so that we can see how high we are, how fast we're going, and make sure we separate those so that we can see them both. And that way we'll be able to monitor how our rocket is doing, how high we're getting, and get a better sense of what our performance is like and what changes we might need to make. Do a sanity check over everything, that everything's assigned to the right keys. And now we have the base of our rocket set up. And the only thing that is left now, once all of the keys are set up and everything is connected, is to make sure that we can actually get to the seat. Now, with a 2-stage rocket, you can stand below it and jump and get to the seat, but it's a little bit tough. And for a 3-stage rocket, it becomes much more difficult, and so we want to actually build a staircase. And so what that's going to require is a detacher, which I'm going to have to remember where that is. And we'll put that over by the seat. Just attach it up here. And then we will attach kind of a stairway going up and around the rocket to access the seat that way. And that will make it a lot easier to get on top of our rocket without having to do tricky jumps or find terrain that can get us up there. So now we're going to go back to the frame builder and actually build a stair so that we can get up. And that's going to require breaking what we've got here. And the first thing we're actually going to do is build a circle that is the same as the circles that we built our stage out of. And that is going to give us kind of a platform so that we can turn our stairs, because there's not quite enough room to make a straight staircase. And it will be a little bit more stable if we wrap the staircase around, and so that's going to require building a few little platforms for us to turn the stairs. And the platforms are just going to be very simple circles. You could do it differently. You could try sending your staircase straight out and not having to turn. And I don't think that you would create big problems. I haven't ever tried it because I actually find it somewhat appealing to have a staircase that wraps around the rocket a little bit. And I find it a little bit appealing to have little platforms. And this is another place where you can let your imagination kind of run free a little bit and make whatever variations you feel like making. You could try having bigger platforms. You could try putting railings around your platforms. You could try having a platform at the top around the seat. And you could try building your stairs a little bit differently, because once we get to the bottom of the staircase, you'll see that there's actually a place where it's going to be a little bit less than ideal. And so you might actually find a better way of building your stair. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the circle, I'm going to break away half of it and make this, which is going to be the basis for our step. And then we want some line 4s. Line 4s are the right height so that knee checking will not come into play, and you can actually walk up these as a staircase. You'll automatically go up, you won't have to jump. You might want to make these shorter in order to make them match up with the ground a little bit better, because once we get to the bottom you'll see that it's not quite the ideal height. Or you may want to make these a little bit taller and see. I have not really experimented to see where exactly height checking comes into play and you have to start jumping up the steps. I know that 4 works, and so that's what I'm going with. So I'm going to put a little platform up here so that we can get up to the seat, and so that we don't end up running into our fins as we build our staircase. So now the thing that we're going to be doing is just building a staircase stand, and I want to stay over the grid as much as I can, because another place I haven't really explored as much as I would like to is in how much you can build out away from the grid and what effect that has. So far it hasn't had a huge negative effect, but I haven't really seen how big our building area is, and I don't want to really take a lot of risks. Now, building these steps becomes a little bit tricky once you start placing them, because they will want to go on upside down. And so you learn pretty quickly which square to click on to have them go into place properly once you twist them. But it takes a while to get used to visualizing pieces doing complex spatial rotations. And so knowing which block to click on, which square to click on, is not always completely obvious and takes a little bit of practice. But once you've got that down, it becomes a pretty automatic process of building these steps, and that can get pretty repetitive. So I'm going to do an edit, and once the stairway is complete, I'll show you some little considerations that have to go into making the bottom of your staircase. So I'm going to wrap it up, do an edit, and we'll come back and see what the bottom of the staircase is like. But before that, I'm just going to drop in a circle here to show you how to very simply turn your staircase to have it wrap around the rocket a little bit. And that should clear our fin just fine. Alright, we've reached the bottom of our staircase with another bend in it, and now we want to check our height from the ground and make sure that everything's even. And so to do that, we're going to grab some straight line pipes and just hook them up to our stand like this and try to line them up. So let's try line 5 here and see if that's the right length. That looks like it will be about the right length to meet up with our stair, and then line 9 this way, just so that we have a sense for how far off the ground we're going to be, since the stand is going to be even with the ground, and we want to make sure that we are lining everything up correctly. So that looks like it's going to be about 3 blocks off the ground. So we're just going to grab some cubes and stack those up so that everything is at the same level when we drop this, because we'll be dropping it from above the ground. You have to drop your vehicles in from the air. And so we want to make sure that everything lands as flat and even as possible. And so that means just having everything come down to the same level. Now that we've got that worked out, we can clean that all up and save our design. And now we want to just kind of do a sanity check and make sure that everything is the way that we want it. Make sure that everything is in place, and make sure that everything is connected up properly. Now, I actually made a mistake, and if you can spot it, good for you. I will certainly be revealing it once I realized it myself in the video. I did record this before I did the audio, so there's a little bit of a spoiler there, but hopefully you can see what the mistake I made was. If not, it will be revealed shortly enough. So we're just going to take a picture and then bake and head out to the launch pad. The launch pad that we're going to be on is very close to the dome itself. It's just a nice flat little area just across the river from the dome. And it's a nice place for launching rockets. Now we have to jump to get onto the first step, which is the little issue, the little suboptimal issue that I mentioned earlier, that it's a little bit higher off the ground than our height checking actually allows for. Now we activate everything, and you can see the mistake I made was forgetting to activate the detacher that would drop the staircase, and so that was a failed launch, but we can fix this pretty quickly. We just have to go up to the detacher and link it up to the seat and set its detach to either boost 1 or activate 1, depending on how you want to do it. That's another thing that doesn't make a huge difference, but has a slight aesthetic difference. So I set it to activate so that the stairs will actually drop away before you launch. You may find it gives you a little more peace of mind to have them drop away as you launch. It doesn't actually make a huge difference because everything is synced up well enough that the timings won't cause any problems. So now we're up here, we can look around, we can drop off our steps, and then we can launch. And the detachers worked fine. We have to watch our fuel. When it gets down to 0, we drop the stage below us. And then we can launch. And we don't actually want to overfire to dry fire our rockets because they can cause some instability. And so we got up to about 13.5 kilometers altitude. I think sea level in this game is actually like 1,800 kilometers for some reason that I don't entirely understand. So 1,800 meters, not 1,800 kilometers. So 13.5 kilometers ends up being like 12, 11 kilometers. Pretty high. You know, it's not going to be getting us into space anytime. We're not going to be getting to whatever that planet-looking thing is that might actually be the sun. We're not we're not getting into space anytime soon on this. There's not enough fuel. Not enough fuel tanks, and the fuel tanks aren't big enough. So in the future, we'll be looking at how to get higher, and we can actually bail out of a rocket. And the reason that I want to do that is because if you're in the rocket when it lands, it will just drop you wherever, which in this case is the middle of the ocean. But if you're not in the rocket, you'll hit the ground, and it will fade to black and drop you right out in front of the dome again. So that is how to build a simple rocket. In the future, we'll be looking at how to improve that design. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.